Hello, my name's Gregory Woods. I've been asked to introduce myself to visitors to the Carcanet website with a view to introducing my new poetry collection, Records of an Incitement to Silence, which will be my sixth collection from Carcanet Press. By way of an introduction, I've been asked to answer a few questions. The first of which was, what is my favourite workplace? And I'm not sure I can say anything beyond that it's my dining table in what used to be a dining room but is now my everything room, really. I sit at an office swivel chair there and eat there and work there and watch television there. In an ideal world, my favourite workplace would be a particular terrace halfway up a mountain overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea in southern Italy, let's say in spring or autumn, hearing just the remote two-tone horns of buses winding their ways up the roads and hearing virtually nothing else. But that's a world which we don't inhabit. I was asked also to name a book that has recently blown me away. Well, I'm not sure about blown me away, but a big book that I've recently read is the Letters of Thom Gunn, which have just recently been published by Faber. An enormous book, which, according to its introduction, according to its editors, really only represents a small fraction of the letters that the poet Thom Gunn wrote in his lifetime. Even so, it's a massive book. I'm particularly interested in it because Gunn was a poet who very strongly influenced my own poetry. And there are in the book 2 or 3 letters of his to me. He's an extraordinarily fluent and interesting writer, as you might expect, about poetry, but also about his own life as a gay man, beginning in England and then emigrating to the United States to be with his lover, gradually coming out over the years, living in San Francisco, and leading a really very interesting life of poetry and pleasure. One of the things that worried me about the book is that he has a habit of saying to his correspondents, of talking very seriously about poetry or anything else, and then suddenly drawing back and saying, "Oh, but I'm in danger of being pretentious," or apologizing for sounding pompous. This seems to me a horrible habit of the English. And it sometimes seems to me a wonder that we have any culture at all, given how embarrassed we are by seriousness. The letters that Gunn sends to me, there are 2 in particular. There's one that now I feel rather embarrassed about, but I'm glad it's in there. He wrote me a very angry letter about a chapter on him in my doctoral thesis. I wrote a PhD thesis on gay men's poetry. I wrote it in the second half of the 1970s. And I sent Tom a photocopy of the chapter on him, and he was horrified by it. Particularly, I think, in the way that I over-sexualize some of his poetry. and overread a lot of it as being about sadomasochism rather than merely about sexy masculinity. But there's also in this book a very generous letter that Gunn later sent me when I'd revised that chapter on him and published it in my book, the book which was a revised version of the thesis, Articulate Flesh, which Yale University Press published in 1987. And Gunn is very, very generous in his appraisal and his appreciation of that book. So I'm glad at least to have that in there as a contrast with his first very angry letter. Gunn eventually read my poetry and also my later book, A History of Gay Literature, and was very, very generous and positive about both. So he's a really important figure in my background, and we did disagree about some quite fundamental things and about poetics, but I feel that he is a very important figure in my development. So it was really quite exciting to read this book and learn so much more about his life, and I'm looking forward to the biography of him that is eventually going to be published by, is being written by Michael Knott, who's one of the editors of the collection of Gunn's letters. I've been asked to talk about the compiling of Records of an Incitement to Silence, my new collection. It's a long decade since my last Carcanet collection, An Ordinary Dog, was published in 2011. And this new collection started as a sonnet sequence, consisting entirely of short sonnets, if you can understand that. They're still 14 lines, but they're shorter lines, iambic trimeter. Originally it consisted only of those, but then I gradually threw out quite a lot of those sonnets and expanded the book in lots of other directions, lots of other forms, lots of other topics. And it became a great big ragbag of a book, rather like my previous collection, An Ordinary Dog. And the publisher was uncomfortable with the bigness and bagginess of it. So I went back to the idea of the original sonnet sequence, refined it down, but it is now a sonnet sequence with interruptions. In particular, there are two very long poems in there which are about talkativeness and are about language that doesn't necessarily get us anywhere. The way that language can simply fill the time but do not much else. It also, of course, fills loneliness, and one can talk to oneself in quite productive ways, but it's debatable whether language in those circumstances has any practical outcomes. So it's an interrupted sonnet sequence. And I'm just going to finish this introduction to myself by reading you from the title poem, Records of an Incitement to Silence. The title poem is the only one that uses free verse, and all the rest are in fixed forms. Really, for the first time in my career, almost a whole book in fixed forms, in metrical forms, a lot of rhyme. But in this poem, it's about 16 fragments of dispatches from trouble spots, I suppose you might call it. The speaker is some kind of correspondent who's at large in a world that's in turmoil. And he seems to be going from place to place and writing small sonnets from which he occasionally quotes. And I suppose the suggestion is that he is writing the sonnets that then make up the rest of my collection. One can take that suggestion or leave it. It doesn't really matter. The sonnets are either in his voice or in, if you want, in my voice or in anybody else's voice. So I'm just going to read you a few sections from that opening poem, that title poem. 1. I woke in the night and struggled to find the light switch, my glasses, a pen. I wrote. It was as if all sounds and smells were smells and sounds of you. I kept looking back. Did I not want to leave? Did I already regret the journey I was embarking on? Did I fear I would never pass this way again? Was I expecting someone to appear on the quayside to wave me away or call me back? I wrote only sonnets. They seemed to fit the shape of my complaint. Part 3. For several years I lived in a city in the south. Its people had a reputation for great warmth. The climate of the Gulf it clings to had given them every reason to be open-hearted and optimistic. The furtive corruption of their officials went unremarked. There was a uniformed guard with a submachine gun at the door of every bank. All was for the best. In those days we were young. What we learned of the world, we thought we were creating. We often looked for ourselves in mirrors. We tested our edges against other surfaces. Part 7. Back in my hotel room, I sat down at the desk and started a poem, writing on hotel-headed notepaper with the free hotel pen. Forgetfulness prevails in these contested forests. But I was hungry and dirty. I ordered some sandwiches from room service. When the boy delivered them, I was freshly showered, wearing only a towel. We gaped at each other, but missed the connection. I ate in front of the television. I felt I was in the wrong place, the wrong time, the wrong life. One night a policeman asked me not who I was, but who I thought I was. It was as if he knew better. I showed him my papers, but he seemed unconvinced. And part 16, the last section of this title poem. I often spent an evening walking out along the road beyond the edge of town. My only company, a thoughtful dog, I'd given shelter during the bombardment, and now could talk to since we shared a past. We often walked along the railway line as if to catch a scent of somewhere else, some distant terminus with no beyond, a feast of spice and liquefying loins. Content to speculate, we'd sniff the air with equal appetite, but no resolve. Reliant on each other's cunning, we imagined other possibilities, a trail of other scents to other ends. In those days, nobody believed in love. Its inconvenience disrupted systems, and its sublime expression tore the sheets. We thought ourselves objectively immune. The only body that remained to me was hers, the dog's, her warmth, her hunger, and the way she kicked my ribs while having nightmares. She listened when I read my poetry, but seemed to like it better when I stopped. Thank you for listening.